These houses truly are more costly to buy and more costly to maintain. But there are some compensating factors you're going to want to see. I'm Stuart Sutton at Acre Plus Homes. We do help buyers and sellers with homes on an acre or more in the Williamson County area. There are far more nuances and factors with a home like this than a typical subdivision home. We're going to cover some of those for you right now. Let's jump in. So on a typical home, you know you want to have a home inspection. You know you want to have a termite inspection. You know you need to make sure the survey is okay. Make sure the title is okay. Just typical due diligence. And this is what most typical agents are familiar with, this little process right here. But when it comes to a home on an acre or more, or even a half acre sometimes, there's a little bit more involved. So let's jump into that list. Yeah, it's a bigger list, quite a bit longer. It's like the list I make for myself to do my chores on Saturday versus the list my wife makes for me. Hers is quite a bit longer. So take a look at this. Home inspection on outbuildings, termite inspection, that should say on outbuildings, survey, septic pumping, well, water quality lab, pool inspection. We're going to cover those one at a time and tell you what they're all about. First of all, you want to have a home inspection, of course. If it's a home on 1.3 acres or 7.4 acres, you're going to have the home inspected. But what about the outbuildings? Might cost you a little extra, probably will, but it's worth every penny. You want to make sure that those buildings are in good condition, especially if they have electricity and plumbing. You want to make sure that it is done properly and that it is working efficiently. Roofing, siding, slab. You want to make sure outbuildings are in good condition because things aren't cheap anymore. And even repairing outbuildings, you might be tempted to say, well, that's just an outbuilding. That's not a big deal. You truly need to know that you're not going to have an unexpected expense with one of those outbuildings. Same with the termite. You want to make sure none of those outbuildings have termites. Now, you may be buying a home on an acre or more on a beautiful manicured lot in a great subdivision. You may not have any outbuildings, and that's absolutely fine. But a lot of times you do have an outbuilding because it's not allowed on typical subdivision lots, but it is on a lot like yours. Maybe you have a casita. Well, a casita is an extra expense to have inspected as a building, as a home, as a second home on the lot. And of course, you want to make sure it doesn't have termites either, because termites are not inexpensive to take care of. Now, in a typical situation, in a typical subdivision, surveys are pretty straightforward. They're kind of cookie cutter, kind of like the houses. But a survey is far more expensive on a home on an acre or more. And a lot of times you won't need a survey. The seller will provide one. It'll be current. It'll be accurate, and that's great. But if one's needed, it's negotiable. Who pays for it? And there are other things in the contract that are negotiable. So let's just say that the seller is going to pay for several things, and you as the buyer have decided, well, since they're paying for those, I'll just buy the survey. Well, just be aware it's not a typical subdivision survey. It's going to be quite a bit more expensive than a typical subdivision survey. I've just seen many times when somebody ordered something for a home on an acre or more, and when the bill came in, they were shocked because they didn't expect that big a bill for what they had previously experienced was a modest bill. Of course, nothing's modest anymore. Even surveys on typical subdivision homes have gone up. And then, of course, you've got septic inspection and septic pumping. Now, the reason I lump these together is because most of the time, septic inspectors want to have the septic pumped when they inspect it. The ideal situation for most septic inspectors is to look at the septic before it was pumped, to see what the water level is and see how the drain fields are performing, and then to have it emptied so that they can observe visually the rest of the tank. That's the typical scenario. So septic inspection is one fee and septic pumping is another fee. So just be aware of that. Now, if there's a well on the property, you also want to have that inspected. Why? Well, for the same reason you want your roof inspected. It's a very expensive part of the property. The most expensive parts of any home are roof and foundation, and on an acre or more, and sometimes less, half acres I've seen with septics and wells. They're all very expensive to replace or even repair when that time comes, unless they're well maintained on a continuing basis. So you want to make sure that you know what the current condition is. Now, why would I add pool here when in a typical subdivision, if you have a pool, you have to have it inspected too? Well, because a much larger percentage of homes on small acreage have pools for obvious reasons. You've got the space. So a lot of people put in pools on homes on a half acre, acre or more because you just simply have the space to do so. So a higher percentage of homes will have a pool and need a pool inspection, and that's an extra cost. Now, can you have the regular home inspector inspect your septic, your pool, and other things like that? Yes, you can, but I don't recommend it. I recommend having an expert inspect those items, because what a regular inspector is going to do is red flag things. If he perceives a problem, he'll recommend you call an expert anyway. But somebody who's not an expert is less likely to see a problem. So I recommend bringing in the expert for septic, for well, for pool anyway. Now, once you've had your due diligence and you've done all that during your option period on your contract, and you've possibly agreed on repairs and you're good to go, there's some other due diligence you need to be aware of. With a home on an acre or more, pay close attention to the appraisal. And I'm going to share something with you. I used to be an appraiser, and I will tell you, appraisers do work hard. But typically, residential appraisers knock out residential appraisals for homes and subdivisions, and they're just not quite as familiar with homes on land. Now, how can I say that? I used to be an appraiser. How can I knock an appraiser like that? I'm really not knocking them. I'm just stating a fact. From appraisals that I've seen, where an appraiser has used comparables that really weren't appropriate for the situation, just because both the subject and the comparables were on an acre or two. But there are certain situations where comparables just don't make sense. For example, a home on an acre in a restricted neighborhood versus a home on an acre in an unrestricted neighborhood where you can park your boat, your RV, and have animals. In the highly restricted where you can't. Those aren't like-kind properties. So pay a close attention to the appraisal and be aware it may cost more to have an appraisal on a home like this. And I've already mentioned the survey, but I wanted to say that one more time. You may have a survey that's fine, but if you have to buy one, it will be considerably more expensive for acreage. Now, a typical subdivision 1 acre plus home won't be that much more. But if you're buying a home on 3.7 acres in an area that has different types of lots, a 1.4 acre here, 3.6 acre there, 5.2 acre there, it will be more expensive because it's an abnormal survey. I hope that makes sense. Another thing you need to pay close attention to are the deed restrictions. So let's just say you're buying a home on an acre or more and you're allowed certain things because you can see them because they're happening in the neighborhood. You want chickens, and several people seem to have chickens. Look at the deed restrictions anyway, because your deed restrictions may say you can't have chickens. And even though other people have them, that doesn't mean that it's okay. If you want to take that risk, understanding that, hey, I may get chickens and later might be called on it along with everyone else, then that's a risk that's up to you entirely, but you need to know where you stand. So in an HOA, there are certain restrictions. If there's no HOA, there could be deed restrictions. That's why a lot of people ask for unrestricted property, because they can do whatever they want, anything they want. That's within the law, of course. But if there are deed restrictions, you might be able to have certain kinds of animals and not other kinds of animals. You might be restricted to the number of animals. So deed restrictions are very important. Be sure that you pay attention to those. And if there is a well on the property, make sure you know the well history. When was the well pump replaced? How deep is it? Has it been changed? All the questions you need to know about the current condition and the history of the condition of that well. How big is the storage tank? Are there storage tanks? And the water quality history. Have there been tests consistently over the years, and have there ever been any tests that failed so that you couldn't drink the water? Has the well ever failed to supply water? I've known people who had wells who had to actually bring water in on a truck and fill their storage tanks so they would have drinking water. Now, don't want to scare you. This is not common, but I have seen it happen. So you need to be aware of the history of that well. Now, this is still what you need to be aware of before you close, before you buy, but it's also maintenance after you close. Let's take a look. So make sure these are in good working order, or at least you know the conditions so that you can address it if and when you need to. Fencing. Let's face it, fencing around a big lot is a lot more expensive than fencing on a 60-foot lot in a neighborhood. And fencing has gotten more expensive than it's ever been. I'm sorry, I'll quit talking about how expensive things have gotten nowadays. Well, that's a lie. I'm not going to quit talking about it. But I will try to confine it to coffee with my wife in the morning. So fencing has gotten more expensive, and there's a lot more fencing on a large lot, of course. So make sure that you maintain that fencing to give it the longest life possible, because that is a big expense. Flat work, there's more flat work. Obviously, you've got a longer driveway back to the house. Make sure your inspector looks at that flat work and make sure it's in good condition and maintain it to give it the longest life possible after you close. Sprinkler systems are more extensive with homes on large lots. Now, a lot of times a home on a large lot will just have sprinkler system within the landscape, and that's great. But if you want to sprinkler the yard, you can. But just be aware that the more property, the more land, the more expensive that sprinkler system is going to be to run and maintain. Now, I've already mentioned well history. You need to make sure that you have a consistent schedule to take care of your septic and your well. I don't see problems with people with wells and septics when they maintain them properly. My wife and I just traded a vehicle and got a brand that we've never owned before. We tend to be loyal to the brands that we like, but this is one that was recommended by friends. And we called the mechanic that we trust and said, okay, tell us about this brand. And he said, you know, that brand will go forever if you do these two things. And he named two things that are very important for that brand of vehicle. So for this brand of property, you need to maintain that well and maintain that septic. So I hope this has been helpful to you and shown you that it does cost more to buy and to maintain a home on an acre or more. But the compensation is far more than the cost to most people. Most people buy a home on an acre or more because of the privacy, the elbow room, the space. And you do have some compensating factors like lower taxes. If you have a well, you may curb your water bill. But instead of doing all the math on it, this video was about why a home on an acre or more costs more to buy when you go under contract and then to maintain after you close. So we covered a lot of that. I hope that it was helpful to you. I'm going to add another video, and that video is about a powerful, proven secret to selling your home on an acre or more. One that will make you more money, one that will get your home sold faster. So I'm going to pop it right up here. Hope you get a chance to watch it because it is incredibly beneficial. It is proven, and once you watch the video, you're going to understand why. Thanks for watching this one. I hope you get to watch that one, and remember, it's your choice, so make it a powerful day.